Carly, it's a pleasure to have you up, and I'm excited for you to be talking about leading with authenticity. Carly joined Cloud Call as a partnerships manager in 2021 before moving her way into her current role at the end of last year. She continues to show hunger and growth at taking over more responsibility, particularly a global responsibility for the SDR and BDR function. And she's responsible for hiring, onboarding, training, and continued developing of the team. And I love it when someone steps up to be the first speaker. So Carly, it's over to you.
Thank you. And thanks for having faith that I will keep this to 7 minutes. When James asked me to speak, I was thinking and browsing through LinkedIn, as a lot of us probably do. And there's a quote that comes up all the time on LinkedIn. It's not the cold calling's dead one, which is a conversation for another day. But it's the one around how people don't leave bad companies, they leave bad managers. And although I don't entirely agree with that, I think there is an element of truth to it. And especially in the climate we're in today, where there's ever-changing business landscapes, we need to make sure we're retaining top talent as well as creating a good environment. So I'm sure a lot of us have had experiences with bad management or management we don't feel comfortable around. So I wanted to talk about leading with authenticity. I feel it's probably the key reason that I have had quite a successful career when it comes to internal progression, both at Cloud Call and at previous companies. And I'm sure we're all aware, as a BDR manager, you are spinning multiple plates at any one time. So you might be a part-time psychiatrist one day, you'll be looking at ops and processes changing and analyzing some data. You're also being a coach, a trainer, a mentor, and many others, often depending on the setup of your current business. So for me, the big difference that leading with authenticity makes is it creates a psychologically safe environment. And I think it's often not spoken about enough how important that is for people in early stage careers like SDRs and BDRs. There's no way that I think you can lead a team successfully long term without really understanding who your team are, what their drivers are, what their blockers are, and how you can collaborate effectively to overcome any challenges that they're currently facing. I think also creating that psychologically safe environment, it not only boosts productivity, and there's some really good studies that have been done by Harvard for anyone that does want to get a deeper understanding that I wouldn't possibly do justice to in 7 minutes. But it actually makes them a lot more open to receiving criticism, which can often be quite a tough part of the role, depending on the characters that you've got within your team. And having that environment where they feel safe. What I've actually noticed with my team, so I've got a team in London, a team in Boston, different markets, different time zones. And one of the things I wanted to do was kind of bring the teams together from a process level and from an understanding level, but also to share best practices in a much more aligned way than Cloud Call were doing previously. So they actually now have a Teams chat that they share calls in, and they'll be very candid about wanting to be ripped apart on that call. They don't just want to hear the good stuff. They really want to hear the stuff that they think they've done or they could do better next time. And what that in turn has created is more accountability, implementing. I think peer coaching is always a really powerful tool to add into your manager kit anyway. But they then implement that so much quicker. And we've seen a really good spike in growth since we've started that group. So having that psychologically safe environment, there's a number of benefits. But yeah, the main thing for me is really helping to excel those results that you're working so hard for your team to start getting. But then the bigger question for managers is, how can you know that you're showing up authentically? Now, the first one is a bit of a Carly Captain Obvious statement, but I'm going to say it anyway. And it is be yourself. We see on LinkedIn daily, on social media daily, people that are pretending to be something they're not, or only highlighting the good side of what they're doing or what they're about. And I think it's really important that what you're saying and what you're doing matches up to who you are, and that's both from a moral kind of high ground and your own moral compass. And if you don't do that, you'll never have that true level of trust and transparency on your team, which means some of them will be at risk of leaving. We've been through huge changes in the last year at Cloud Call, and I've retained every single one of my top talent. And I think a lot of that does come from having that kind of environment where we are really ourselves. We're safe to be ourselves. And we actually encourage that at Cloud Call, that you can show up and be who you are. The second part, and a big part of why I joined Sales Confidence, is commit to being a lifelong learner. If you're trying to teach your team to have self-accountability and change what they're doing, either from a call perspective or emails or cadences, that's always a lot easier if you're showing them that you've got the mindset that you are constantly trying to evolve in your role and get better. And James, being with Sales Confidence and James, I've been introduced to some excellent peers. So Josh is one of them. Matt, who I know is watching, is one of them, that have helped me overcome hurdles that you don't really get that support internally a lot of the time. So I'm always committed to just being a better person than I was yesterday, a better manager than I was yesterday, and leading from the front and understanding and showing your team that you are allowed to be a masterpiece and a work in progress at the same time. And then the final part of how you can show up is, and it's probably the area that I see most inauthentic leaders failing, is being humble. So while you are growing, there's no growth without failure in most examples. So when you make mistakes, own up to those mistakes, have the humility to discuss it openly with your team. Talk about what lessons you've learned from that, how it can stop you making the same mistakes going forward, or how it can stop them making similar mistakes in their career later on in life. And I'm sure some of you may be thinking, that's great, Carly, I am a really authentic leader. What I think a great takeaway to do would be for everyone that wants to kind of get that temperature check on their team is creating a really quick free survey, sending it out anonymous replies, and getting your team to kind of rate you on a scale of 1 to 10. And if you want to develop as a manager and develop the best possible culture you can, there's other areas that come into it, which is recruiting, and Chris is going to talk about that later. But also really get that kind of gauge point for where you are and where your team thinks you are and where you think you are, and what you can put in place to potentially improve some areas. So yeah, I'd really encourage anyone to do that. That's a wrap for me. And so thank you, James, for giving me this opportunity and speaking to everyone.
Awesome, Carly. Thanks very much for your contribution.